Welcome to Charter California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. Glad you're with us today. On this episode, we will be speaking with Gerri Schipske. She's a member of the Long Beach City Council. We will also be joined by Thomas Field. He is the Vice President of the Long Beach Port Commission. But we start with Nancy Foster. She is the First Lady of the beautiful city of Long Beach. Madam First Lady, thank you for joining us on Charter California Edition.
Thank you so much.
Your husband, Bob, is the mayor of Long Beach, one of the great cities in the state of California. And I am so pleased to hear that you are involved in the California Women's Conference. I have attended past conferences. They're phenomenal.
They are phenomenal.
How did you get involved?
I opened up an email one day.
Oops,
Yep,
that was your big mistake.
That was my thrill,
Yes.
actually. And it was from Michelle Patterson,
Right.
who's putting on the conference. And she actually invited me to be a guest speaker. I was like in awe. I didn't answer for a couple of days.
You are
I had
the
to
First Lady
I had
of
to
Long
digest
Beach,
that.
but you are the First Lady of
I
Long
know.
Beach, and the conference is in Long Beach,
Right.
September 23rd and 24th,
Right.
and it's been in Long Beach for years.
Oh, yes.
Right.
It started in 1985.
Exactly,
Right,
exactly.
right.
And so what's nice about your involvement, if I may say, is that you are talking about a few issues when you present and when you talk to the delegates that are so important in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
The first one deals with parenthood. As I think I told you, I have two children, 10 and 8, and my wife, essentially she's a stay-at-home mom.
Right,
I mean,
right.
she
Which
does
is
the,
great.
That's what you did.
Which is great.
And tell me about it, because you had a different, you lived in a different time.
I lived in a different time.
Right.
I lived in, what's 1969,
Oh, my.
1972.
Right.
When I chose to be a stay-at-home mom, I was passionate about being home with my children. I would not hand them over to anybody else. So our home was filled with secondhand furniture. I actually, I
okay.
I made my clothes.
Right.
I did without. Our front yard had no plants.
Right.
My life was devoted. Our lives were devoted to our children.
And so you stayed at home while your husband at the time, I mean, when you had babies, he was in school, is that right?
He was going to school.
Right.
He was going to Sacramento he was a consultant.
Right.
He was going to school. He was laying carpet. He was installing carpet. He made ends meet so I could be home with his children.
And so when you attend the conference in September 23rd and 24th, you're going to be talking about being that stay-at-home mom and how that's okay.
Yes, it's fine because in that time, I actually felt less than being a stay-at-home mom. You know, I felt like, plus I didn't go to college. I was a hairdresser. But that was my love. Doing hair was my
with
love.
that. My sister's a hairdresser.
Yes,
and she loves
I
it.
know. I love my hairdresser.
Your hair still looks great.
And she's like a
Right.
psychologist to me, and we're best
as
friends.
is my sister.
Yes, but that's me. That's what I did to myself. I did that to myself too. I mean,
But still,
you know.
But still.
But I love that I was able to stay home with my children.
And so you're going to be presenting that message at the conference. Do you think it's fair to say, though, that in 2012, it's more all right to be a stay-at-home mom?
I definitely do. Because when I hear the word a stay-at-home mom, I go, hello, that was me years and years ago, 40 years ago.
You also talked about what you did to yourself.
Yes.
And I want to talk about that because you have, I guess you could say, revealed that you have battled with mental illness.
Right.
Bipolar disorder, depression,
anxiety.
And I just want to say on the record, I thank you for going public with that because these are diseases, whatever that means.
And they're so prevalent. They're all over the place.
And there's no shame. I mean, no one's ashamed
no shame.
of having cancer.
That's right.
Why should you be ashamed
right.
of having depression, anxiety, and bipolar disorder?
Right.
So talk to me about that revelation and how that will be a message that you present at the Women's Conference.
Well, I shared my story, I think it was 2007 in the Press Telegram. Tom Hennessy contacted me.
Was your husband already mayor when you did that?
Yes, I did. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. Well,
Wow.
when we campaigned and we would go to meet and greets, I would actually share if Bob becomes the mayor, I'm happy to share that.
It's interesting. I don't know if you remember back in the 80s, after Michael Dukakis lost his run for the presidency, his wife, Kitty Dukakis, really went into a spiral.
Right.
And it wound up that she suffered from mental illness.
Right.
And I think even back in the late 80s, early 90s, there was still kind of what's this Kitty Dukakis?
Right. Well,
teetotaler, what's going on here? But now we know.
Well, you know something? Jesse Jackson Jr.
Right.
is having a problem with mood disorder.
Right.
But
Depression.
And you know, somebody was on the television saying he'll be back in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. I said to Bob, no way.
Won't.
Right now they're diagnosing him. They're trying to get him stabilized on a
meds,
medication.
right.
This man is going through hell, and it's very difficult. We don't need to put any pressure on him, and he needs to take this time for himself to heal and to get stable again.
So that's your message at the conference, is you need to heal.
Yes,
You know, it's not that easy to just, it's not as if you could say, oh, I'm not depressed anymore. My anxiety's gone.
No, I still have spells.
Of course.
I've actually, in the middle of the night, had panic disorders and been taken away in an ambulance because I had a panic attack.
And you thought it was a heart attack.
And I thought I was a heart. It's happened twice. And now I tap Bob on the shoulder and I tell him I'm feeling strange. He goes,
Right.
we both know what it is now.
Right.
We both
Relax.
know what it is, and so I'm comfortable with that.
But the good news is that there are medications that can help.
There are, because for 11 years I tried the holistic way.
You suffered.
And I suffered. You know, I would go to the doctor's office and I'd tell them what was wrong with me, and I said, I don't feel well. And they go, you look great. And I said, well, put
I
it
know,
back.
look at you. You're
Put it
pretty,
back
you
over
got
my
blue
head.
eyes,
Put
right.
it back over my head. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear that. And I finally decided I need to go to a psychiatrist. I started reading articles in the magazines. And so I went to see a psychiatrist, and he diagnosed me, put me on Impermin, was an old-time medication. And I was very fortunate because 3 weeks later it kicked in, and that day I could feel it,
Literally.
this calm coming over me.
And I believe that there still is a bit of a scarlet letter for those, oh, I'm taking medication.
Yes.
But yet, you take medication if you have diabetes.
Right.
You take medication if you have high blood pressure. Why shouldn't you take medication if you have a mental disorder? I mean, I hate even the word disorder, but that,
It's a mental illness.
but,
It's an illness.
but is that part of your message? It's okay to take medication
okay.
if that's what you need.
That's absolutely
Not
right.
everyone needs it.
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
no, because sometimes you can, you know,
cycle in or out or whatever it may be.
Right. You can do diet. You can do exercise, which is phenomenal, which is great for you to help.
all integrated.
It all, you know. But for me, I tried so many things. So it wasn't placebo, because I had tried so many things that it kicked in. So this is something that could be shared at the conference, so women feel more comfortable with.
Right.
And the thing that I want to tell people is, when you're depressed, your mind it feeds you negative thoughts. It makes you less than. And that's a hard thing to overcome, to realize that's your disease is making you feel less than, which is hard to comprehend.
I mean,
You know?
I hope you appreciate how valuable it is for someone like you to be talking about it. Because, you know, for better or for worse, when someone in the public eye speaks about it, and especially there's something about first ladies. When first ladies talk about it, there is something more.
Well, I have to share with you, the first event that I went to, people were coming up to me and thanking me. Men were coming up to me with tears in their eyes and thanking for sharing, because nobody had ever shared about this before.
So the conference, again, coming up September 3rd, 24th at the Long Beach Convention Center.
Right.
And so there'll be panel discussions.
Right.
Booths, keynote speakers, performers, music, food, philanthropy.
There's everything.
There's everything. Now, I have to tell you, my daughters, 10 and 8, I plan on bringing them.
Yes.
I mean, I think
It's a great experience for a young person.
Yeah, and for a young girl, if I dare say.
Right.
I mean, I am woman, hear me roar. I
Right.
mean, you know, Helen Reddy said it.
And Michelle Patterson, who's putting this on, God love her. You know, I admire her so much, and she's such a wonderful person, and she's so easy to know. I invited her to my home. We sat down, we talked for 2.5 hours, and I was just so comfortable with her. And I just admire her so much, because last year, women were saying to me, we have to bring this conference back. They were looking at me.
They took a year off.
You know, and
Right.
I can't do it. You
Right.
need somebody, you need a Michelle Patterson,
And she
who's
did
got
it.
all the connections that could do it. And I get goosebumps thinking about it.
And I got goosebumps when you told your story, and I thank you for telling your stories, and I'm glad you're involved in the California Women's Conference.
I am too.
Yes,
and I'm so happy that it's back.
I
I'm
agree.
really-
I thank the First Lady of Long Beach for joining us, and I thank you for joining us. When we come back, we'll be speaking with Gerri Schipske. She's a member of the Long Beach City Council. We'll be right back. Welcome back to California Edition. My name is Brad Pomerance. Our guest, Gerri Schipske, she is a councilwoman in Long Beach, and it's that time of year. It's time for cities like Long Beach to pass budgets. Before me is the proposed budget for fiscal year 2013. Tough times, no doubt. The projected deficit was $17.2 million. What can you tell us about that deficit?
Well, the deficit is, I think, very interesting in light of the fact we also now have an announced surplus that matches the deficit.
The surplus from fiscal year 2012?
No, surplus that is coming in from oil revenues that we have. We apparently we under budget. We say oil's not going to go above $55 a barrel. So guess what?
Well,
it stayed way above 85 this entire year. It stayed above 75 for the last 5-10 years. And guess what? That extra money they're calling one-time revenues. And so that's the surplus.
So what are they doing with the one-time revenues?
There's a Christmas tree list, a shopping list,
well, which is
of
nice.
different projects that are being proposed. And yes, some of the things are really needed, but I don't know how we justify that when we tell residents we're cutting police, we're cutting fire, we're decimating the recreation program.
Well, let's talk about that, because under the spending blueprint, there's a call to reduce the LBPD budget by almost $9 million. Eliminating 40 sworn officers, I guess through attrition more than anything. Eliminating civilian staff.
Civilian staff that actually do the work of some of the uniformed staff at a much lower cost are our community service officers who go out there and help in our neighborhoods so you don't have to send a uniform. They're all being eliminated under this budget. It doesn't make sense.
And you're merging South and West divisions, is that right?
Yes, they're talking about instead of having 4, they're going to have 3, and I don't know the reasoning behind that. Crime has gone up.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because it is interesting that as you are cutting officers through attrition or otherwise, in other parts of California, we've seen crime drop even during the recession. The Long Beach crime statistics are not as positive. In the first part of this year, violent crime up 5.8%, property crimes up 10.7%. This is problematic.
It is, especially when you break it down to the east side. We're finding that the violent crimes have actually gone up 13% and the property crimes have gone up 23%. And granted, the level of crime is much lower, is an all-time low, but if it's your home being broken into, your car being stolen, I just got a constituent who emailed me the day before yesterday, 4 of their tires were taken totally off their car.
But the trend may be better, but if you look at the more recent trends, there are spikes.
Right, and what I don't get too is that we hear constantly in public sessions with the police, because of the government's realignment where they are sending now prisoners back to the community, that we are going to see a spike in crime. So at the very time we're being told crime will go up, and it is going up, we have cuts, and we're certainly not.
But the purpose of the realignment scheme was to have lesser serious offenders serve time in their local communities as a way to attach them to communities, as a way to attach them to rehabilitation programs.
No, not necessarily. This recent realignment is because the prisons are overcrowded.
Well, that too, but the alleged benefit would be they're closer to
Except if you see what the plan's going on, they have turned over these released prisoners to the probation department in the county. These are probation officers who are not parole officers. They are now going to have to take on the functions of being parole officers, and that's a whole other problem in itself. But you're bringing people who have committed crimes back into a community at a time we're saying we have to cut police.
So in addition to cuts in police, we'll see under the proposed budget cuts in library services, cuts in Department of Parks, Recs, and Marine.
Those things that add to the quality of our life in here, which is another insane thing. Because you're going to hear, well, we have to cut somewhere. I continue to say, not when you're sitting on a surplus. It doesn't make sense. If I have debts to pay and I get some money that I didn't know that would come in, maybe I got an increase in my salary, I'm going to pay those debts. I'm not going to go out and buy a new car. So I don't know how we tell voters.
Well, you're one of 7 council members. You are a persuasive individual.
9.
Thank you for correcting me. One of 9 council members. You're a persuasive individual. Can you speak with your fellow council members about trying to look at the situation differently than the proposed budget?
There's going to be numerous conversations, and I think the more important conversation has to be out in the community. The community not only has to tell me, but the mayor and the rest of the council.
Well, guess what? They can.
These are not proposals that they like.
Guess what? They can, because there's a new I'll call it a game, but I don't want to use that term pejoratively.
No.
Because there is
It's an interactive experience.
Thank you, Madam Schipske. An interactive experience through the organization Next 10. I actually interviewed Noel Perry, who operates Next 10. He is the founder of it. Tell us about what Next 10 is.
Well, I was looking for a way that we could engage citizens in the decision-making process. I've been pushing Open Up Long Beach for a while, and I came upon Next 10. Next 10 had been doing the California Budget Project, and what that is it gives you an opportunity to go online and see what the budget is, and then you make choices, and then there's a discussion online as to the pros and cons of those choices, and that if you take this money away, or you want to add money here, you got to take money from something else. It engages people into the process that we have to go through.
How do we get onto the website?
It's going to be set up very shortly.
Longbeach.gov?
Yes, it's going to be
Next10.org.
No, it's going to be longbeach.gov. My colleagues approved an item that I put forth. We are purchasing the software. They're loading it up right now, as I understand.
Sure.
They're putting the budget.
By the time this airs, I'm sure
absolutely,
it'll be there.
and you'll have an opportunity. Is it perfect? No, but it's the first time that online citizens have been asked to engage. Additionally, some of us are having town hall meetings, telephonic town hall meetings, and then we're also going to be out in the community asking people, what do you think of these proposed cuts?
So how are you going to collect that data and then put it into a form where you really can get a true sense of what the residents of Long Beach want?
Well, we're working with the software. There's other capabilities that we can do, uservoice.com, where we take actually the listing of all the proposed cuts, and we can say to you, go online and rank these cuts. As much input as possible. It's not going to be scientifically,
of course,
exact, but it's going to be a way to get people involved, because people need to see what it is that we're going through in this budget process and the impact it's going to have on their lives.
I want to talk to you, if I can, about what's known as Measure J, which was passed by the voters of Long Beach in 2000, and it reduced the utility users tax from 10 to 5%.
Right.
Now, we all love our taxes to be reduced. Right. Who doesn't? Right. But there is some rumblings about whether it's time to look at Measure J again, and whether we should maybe increase that utility users tax. It doesn't have to go back to 10%, but as I understand it, for every percent increase, the general fund would net $8 million. Right. So if you have a deficit, let's forget the surplus, but if you have a deficit of...
But see, Brad, that's the problem. As long as you have a surplus, you can't go back to the voters and say, by the way, we want to increase your utility use tax. The same phenomena is going to happen in the state of California now that it's been disclosed that as they cut parks programs, they were sitting on a tremendous amount of money.
$54 million.
$54 million, and now there's other funds that are being disclosed. So that's the dilemma. People are more astute. They can get access to more information.
It is remarkable.
And I don't think people would tolerate us asking them for an increase when we're sitting here over the last 2 years, 34 million surplus that we spent on other things, and that we didn't, and that we continued to cut services. But by the way, we want to come and ask you to raise your utility tax.
So it's not time.
I don't think so.
I look at other cities around the state, and amen, Long Beach is not facing a fiscal crisis like San Bernardino, like Stockton, like Mammoth Lakes, but as a observer of municipal government, what do you make of this rash of bankruptcies? I guess not a rash, but it could be soon.
And actually, I actually just went up to Stockton, and I met with one of the city council persons.
Oh, wow.
And
Tell me about it.
We had an extensive conversation. In each of these communities, more than 60% of the homes are in foreclosure.
Right.
And when that happened, then people also simultaneously lost their jobs.
And it's the same in San Bernardino.
The retail base fell out. You had overbuilding in a lot of areas. One of the reasons it didn't happen in Long Beach, we have about 2,500 foreclosures. We had no new development. And that, in these communities, by the way, they're the same communities that were touted in all the newspapers, where to buy cheap property. The third one is Las Vegas. They are all underwater because new development people couldn't afford.
Gerri Schipske, thanks for joining us. Her name is Gerri Schipske. Don't forget, she's an author herself. She writes some beautiful books about the history of Long Beach. I don't have them here, but you can find them online. I'm Brad Pomerance. Thank you so much for watching Charter California Edition. This is Charter California Edition. Our guest today is Thomas Fields. He is the Vice President of the Long Beach Port Board of Harbor Commissioners. We thank you so much for joining us, sir. We appreciate it. For our viewers, is there a difference between the Long Beach Port and the Los Angeles Port?
Yeah, there is. I mean, I think the major difference is that we service two different set of customers. And
it's that simple.
It's pretty much that simple.
Right.
If you look on a map, the only thing that separates us is an imaginary line.
Literally?
Yeah, literally.
You would never know when you went from one to the other.
No, you wouldn't. Well, except with the exception, if you go across the bridge, you'll see a sign that says
Well, you
entering.
would know, but I wouldn't know.
Well, there is a sign that says entering the Port of LA
Got
or
it.
entering the Port of Long Beach.
Got it.
And that would be really the only difference.
Right.
You would be able to tell.
But the good news is about the twin ports, as they're known, is they really, at least to my mind, they do work symbiotically. I mean, there is a sense of fraternity or you know, to really beat the Panama Canal, for example.
Yeah.
I mean, there isn't much. Is there competition per se?
Oh, absolutely, we're friendly competitors.
Right.
And I would say that a lot of what it comes down to is a simple matter of this: that there's an imaginary line, but for example, air quality. The air makes no distinctions between where the line is. So we work together a great deal on environmental issues.
And let's talk about that, because in terms of greening the ports, look, I'm just watching, but it does seem that the last decade and into this decade has been really a boom for greening our ports. So many initiatives have been taken, and from what I understand, so many have been wildly successful.
Yes.
Explain.
Well, we were basically asked by our citizens to clean up the air.
Right.
And it was a matter of it's not just good for citizens, it's good for business. We could not have expanded the way we have had we not cleaned the air up, and we've been pretty successful with that. Diesel pollutants are down 70%
Well,
from 2005.
that's the Clean Trucks program.
Yeah, exactly.
Which has been very successful.
Yeah, we plan to, in 10 years, we'd like to get down to zero emissions. That's the goal. And I believe we're on the way to doing that. We're testing new technologies. That's going to be a reality. And I think what will happen, ultimately, you'll look at the ports of Long Beach and the ports of LA, and you'll see probably a green industry. And that is shocking to consider where we've come from.
I remember I covered an event maybe 5-7 years ago, and it was when Janice Hahn was a member of the Los Angeles City Council, and they were Long Beach members as well, and they were demonstrating for us that when the ships came in, instead of idling, they would plug in.
Yes.
And I can't remember the name of that program.
Cold ironing.
Right, exactly. And that was another way that the ports have worked to green their communities.
Well, and one of the things is we cannot control ships out in the open ocean. I mean, that is not our purview. However, what we can do is once they dock, and that's where really in a lot of ways they're the most polluting, because they're running their generators and their engines, which are burning bunker fuel, which is probably the most polluting of all of coal fuel. They're burning that, and that is going into the air. Now, if you get them to plug in and use all the necessary engines they need with electricity, you've eliminated a huge source of pollution at the port.
And that program has been fully implemented?
We're implementing it now. We are putting it into 2 of the terminals now. And we're basically I believe at the end of 2015, probably 80% of all of the terminals will have cold ironing.
To say that the ports are important to our local economy would be a wild understatement. I had no idea until I started covering the Long Beach area how pivotal the twin ports are to our economic engine. For our viewers, for me, explain to us how and why the ports drive so much of our Southland economy.
Well, let's just start with today. As you know, the economic engines have sputtered, throughout the country.
We know that.
Here in this region, probably the only economic driver that's really going full force happens to be both ports. This year, we're going to be investing $4.5 billion in infrastructure, and that's over the next 10 years.
Is that the Middle Harbor project?
Middle Harbor will be 1.2 by itself, but there will be 4.5, which will be invested in all infrastructures throughout just the port of Long Beach.
Well, let's talk about the Middle Harbor project, because this is massive. Yes. It is a massive project with massive implications for the job market. As I understand it, when this project is done, which should be by the end of the decade, there will be close to 1,500 permanent jobs created. 1,500.
That is quite correct. Yeah.
In an economy where we're not growing as many jobs as we'd like, just in this community, 1,500 jobs.
Yeah. And this goes back to this whole issue of globalization. we have entered into a period where the whole world, we're competing with the entire world. And 70% of all Asian cargo comes in through these two ports here.
70%. Well, as I understand it, the twin ports are the number 1 and 2 ports in the world.
Right. Well, no, we're number 1 and 2 in the,
I misspoke.
In the country.
In the country, yes.
If you combine us together, I believe we're like number 6.
Yes, I
combined.
think you're right. Yes, that's right. Yeah. You talk about the world, and yes, we're competing with the world, but as I see it, we're competing with Panama. Oh, well, I mean, okay, that really is our main competitor.
I'll tell you something. I am not very concerned about Panama.
Really?
Yes, it's an issue.
Really?
But if you think about it, the Panama Canal goes both ways. We're going to be getting cargo from Brazil, for example, going in the direction of going to Asia.
Right.
Also, the other thing is this. The East Coast, there's only one port that really can take those ships that are going to be going through the Panama Canal.
Savannah?
That's Virginia.
Virginia
is the only one who will be able now. Savannah and Charleston and Baltimore and New York are all racing to get down to the depths to handle the big ships. Here in Long Beach, we're there.
Right.
We had a 12,000 TEU vessel come here.
What's that mean?
That means tons equivalent units, which is basically when you're on the freeway and you see the big trailers with those containers on them, each one of those is a TEU.
But the canal is spending over $5 billion to widen and deepen, and that will be done in 2014.
Yes.
So I love your optimism, but
well, there's a couple of things. I mean, the numbers say this, that over 50% of the cargo that comes here stays here. We have a large metropolitan area. So we have a discretionary cargo about 50%. The other thing is this. It's a matter of logistics. To go from the West Coast to the East Coast by rail is much faster.
It is?
Yes.
Than to loop around the canal.
The only goods we believe will be going through the canal will be those that are not time sensitive, therefore they're not going to be the most valuable goods. We will continue to retain our market. And in fact, I'm fairly convinced we're going to, in fact, grow our market.
At the same time, there are budget cuts going on at all levels of government. And as I understand it, the Long Beach Port has had to cut its budget, I think about 5% for the fiscal year of 2013. So how are you growing your markets, growing infrastructure, while still facing budget cutting that's so necessary at all levels of government?
By being more efficient. I mean, really, a lot of what you do in times like this is you look at your organization and you say, how can we become more efficient? And that's what we've done. We've done it from top to bottom, and we will continue doing that.
I also know that, I mean, I will admit something to you, no one else, you're not listening. My wife and I like cruises. I admit it, we like cruises. But because of what's happening in Mexico, the cruise industry on the West Coast has suffered. There aren't as many cruise ships that are leaving from the Twin Ports. How is that impacting the ports?
Well, it's not impacting the Port of Long Beach as much as it's impacting the Port of LA.
Right. Are there cruise ships leaving Long Beach?
We don't have any cruise ships coming out of Long Beach.
But it's still the Twin. I mean,
it's the Twin, yeah.
Exactly.
So the complex is being impacted by it. And LA has been impacted by it. I believe, though, I understand that while the ships going south to Mexico have declined, I believe there's been an increase in ships going north to Alaska.
Okay.
And I think what you'll see is there'll be greater emphasis put on those ships, and there'll be more people going to Alaska.
Now, in our final moments, I do want to mention the Middle Harbor Project again, because while the permanent jobs are at the end of the decade, the construction jobs are starting now?
That's absolutely correct.
So how can we apply for jobs? I mean, I'm sure there are people who want work.
Yes, and we do have those jobs available. I believe we're talking about probably, when you look at the construction jobs, I believe you're probably talking about 5,000 jobs.
5,000 jobs. Can we go to the website at polb.com? Org? What's the website?
polb.org. Excuse me, .com.
.com, perfect. Okay, I want to thank you, Thomas Fields, for joining us very much. He is with the Board of Harbor Commissioners for the Long Beach Port. I'm Brad Pomerance. We'll be right back on Charter California Edition.